Hello, Internet. I'm Evan Dashevsky, features editor with PCMag.com. Welcome to The Convo. Today, we're going to talk about work, specifically how there might not be any of that for us to do, for us humans to do as technology advances. Okay, so a lot of people are sounding the alarm that in the not crazy distant future, there simply might not be enough jobs for we humans to do. It's not outside the realm of possibility. So what do we do about that impending apocalypse? Well, there's a lot of ideas out there, but not really a consensus. So to help us sort through it all, I'm glad to have today's guest. James Pethokoukis is the correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Very good.
Yeah, is the DeWitt Wallace Fellow and the American Enterprise Institute and the editor of AEI Diaz. And he's the host of the Money and Politics podcast. His work has appeared in the New York Times, USA Today, and Investors Business Daily, just to name a few. Very fancy. He's an official CNBC contributor and has appeared on the McLaughlin Group, R.I.P. John McLaughlin, CNN, and PBS's Nightly Business Report. And he's a former Jeopardy champion. He's super smart. Okay, so James Pethokoukis, welcome to The Convo.
Thanks for having me on. You must love this topic. You have good energy today.
I do.
You always have good. This is exceptionally good energy.
I'm excited about not having to work ever again. So for those of you at home, the show is called The Convo, not The Dialogue. So if you have any questions about the economy or what Alex Trebek is really like, ask them in the comments, and Social Pete will read them off throughout the show. If you are watching this after the fact or listening on the podcast and you have questions, Google it or something. Okay. So before we get into some possible solutions, let's jump into the problem that's at hand. Yeah. Do you find that there is any kind of building consensus among economists and that technological unemployment is something that we should be thinking about? And if so, on what kind of timeline?
Well, certainly I think if you talk a lot to people in Silicon Valley,
they
probably have the most aggressive view as far as to what extent robots will take all the jobs, whether it's technological unemployment where there are no jobs, or whether it's more like unemployment, where there's lots of jobs, but they don't pay particularly well. Mm-hmm. That we're going to be a country of sort of butlers and valets and home health care aides. So there'll be those will be most of the jobs. And then at the very top, there will be PhD computer scientists, just very kind of abstract skills. And so while you may have a job, I hope you like the free video games and Wikipedia, because that's what you're going to get. You're not going to have a good. So I think if you talk to people in Silicon Valley, they think this thing is coming, which is why they've focused a lot more on the solution. I think if you talk to economists, they're a lot more skeptical, because one, this is not a new story. Worrying about automation and robots taking jobs and machines, that has been a reoccurring concern really since the Industrial Revolution. And while there have been very difficult transition periods where perhaps you had unemployment and wages didn't go up, eventually things have all sort of worked out in the end. Mm-hmm. So I think sort of the baseline economist expectation is that might happen again, where there might indeed be a very difficult transition period, but in the end there will be jobs. Incomes will rise. It's a very easy answer for economists to give. That's one. So there's kind of a range of ideas.
Now, there was a bomb let off in the economy around 2008, 2009, and basically the unemployment level, the official unemployment level, has kind of gone back to where it was. But the the opposition to whoever's in office likes to point out, the participation in the workforce is still kind of low. Now, do you think that's actually a signal that this is something happening right now?
Oh, right. So it's very easy to take sort of two things. One, that you have low unemployment, but the participation rate is higher than what you would guess with an unemployment rate that low. So you have that happening. At the same time, you read a lot of stories about robots and technologies and drones and driverless cars. You think, well, that explains it. Yeah. Again, I think economists are more skeptical of that explanation. There's an economist, David Autor, who did a ton of work that's been in the news lately about China trade. Because economists really didn't think China trade really had a huge impact on workers in the 2000s, but his research found that it actually had quite a bit of impact. And he thinks that the automation story, it was a huge story sort of in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. But since 2000, maybe it's half and half, where it's automation and trade. But of course, we're also creating jobs at the same time. So I think it's still more of kind of a tomorrow thing than a today thing, where they're actually it's costing jobs. But certainly when you look at something like how many people drive trucks and cars And then you hear that we could have a completely driverless fleet by 2020. There you go. You go. Hopefully bigger than that. It's not hard to see why how this could actually make a real impact on employment in the very near future. So,
Facebook, I see you have a question.
So in a lot of cases, you'll have robots maybe taking over people's jobs, and they're going to have to train to, pursue some new career. How do you overcome people's resistance to training for these new types of jobs?
Right. That's a fantastic question. How many 55-year-old men who've been working, a blue-collar job are suddenly going to become software engineers? There is not a great answer for those people. If your goal is to retrain them in technology, that may when I talk about the transition period, I think those are the kind of people who are to get caught in the transition period, and this may not be a huge positive for them, which is why not only should we be thinking about and you don't want to end up on disability insurance, which is also a terrible option because people then they're out of the workforce. So you might be talking about things like they might take different kinds of jobs that maybe don't pay as well as your previous jobs, but maybe you subsidize those wages in some points to still have a decent standard of living. But that this is not going to be sort of a net plus for everybody, and there's going to be a transition period, and some people are going to get caught into it, unfortunately.
Well, let's talk about some of the reactions that society can or should have about this problem. Let's say we know it's happening. I guess like the first one we should talk about is what we're doing. Now, the Trump administration and other administrations around the world are kind of going towards protectionism and, in Trump's case, bad-mouthing people who do move their jobs offhand. And a lot of stories are coming out that the jobs that are being announced that are saved, like at the Carrier plant in Indiana, that they're actually going to be automating their plant more than they would have otherwise. Right. So it's less American jobs that would have been more Mexican jobs. I don't know. What do you think about
jobs for American robots?
Exactly. Yeah.
What we're.
But is that? I mean, that strategy might work temporarily, but is that a long-range scheme that can work?
It's interesting that we had this election and there was a lot of talk about jobs and a lot of talk about jobs being hurt by trade. Almost zero talk about sort of the automation issue, which is weird since people are talking about it. And I've written a ton about it, and there've been a ton of news stories, but it seemed to not penetrate. In fact, there was a great moment where Trump was in Pittsburgh. He gave a big economy speech in 2016, and he talked about American steel and coal. Yeah. Totally ignoring you have Uber in Pittsburgh, Google. So I think in this administration, I'm not sure there's a huge awareness of the automation issue. Though I did hear the Trump economic advisor Gary Cohn has talked a bit about it and the need for education. So I'm not sure it's on their radar screen. But I think the problem that protectionism and people are sort of to the extent you might have some sort of automation backlash, which perhaps we can talk about, is the focus there is. Are you trying to protect workers or are you trying to protect their jobs? Which is not exactly the same thing. Because I think trying to tell people, we're going to guarantee that you have this job forever and nothing different will be required for you. You'll never have to change jobs. I think that is a promise we cannot make. You cannot make it. You cannot eventually shield those jobs from either trade or automation. So you have to think about protecting the worker. Whether that's training, or whether that's modernizing the safety net for the 21st century, whether it's a wage subsidy or something else to make sure that you don't have a huge drop off in people's standard of living, and that's the debate we should have had in 2016 that we did not have.
Well, let's talk about some of the solutions. One of the ones that Silicon Valley is very excited about, as I'm sure you know, is the universal basic income. I've talked to a lot of engineers, roboticists, and not even people based in Silicon Valley. That's what they're kind of really excited about. So I guess in a very brief description, basically you get money for existing. Right. And I don't know, what do you think about that? I should also mention, you're with the American Enterprise Institute. You guys have a viewpoint. You don't like it
we love markets.
Well, no.
I mean, we love the markets.
But you don't like it when the government does things that
we like when the government does some things. Okay, and the things that it does, we hope it does very, very well.
Okay.
But we don't like the government to do everything.
Okay, so let's talk about this universal basic income.
Right.
Okay,
now, it sounds like a communist scheme.
Yeah.
We're going to raise taxes and cut everybody checks.
Yes.
Though actually, one big proponent of this idea is actually Charles Murray, who is an AEI scholar. Though views are very different. But you're right. Silicon Valley has sort of latched on this idea. Because, as we said earlier, they have probably the most aggressive timetable as far as when we're going to start seeing these jobs sort of hemorrhage and a lot more, whether or not they take our jobs or take parts of our jobs. So they've sort of leapt ahead to thinking about solutions. And if you're worried about technological unemployment, the first thing you're going to think of is, okay, if they're unemployed, we don't want anybody starving, so we'll just give them a basic income. It's almost like a very neat, sort of elegant economic solution. And again, some people
Which has its roots on the right.
Right.
Yeah,
So, right.
yeah.
As I said, you can find people, you can find a lot of libertarians who would like that. They want to sort of replace the existing welfare state. Usually when people talk about basic income, it's not sort of a check on top of everything else. It's a check that replaces everything else, which is why there's actually a lot of people on the left are skeptical of that idea, because they think you're going to replace everything else with the check, but the check might not be quite as big, and then people aren't going to want to raise taxes. I think as an idea to consider, we certainly should. There are various flavors of the basic income, but again, right now I'd rather focus on trying to get people good jobs today and training them for good jobs before I sort of just throw up my hands and say, let's cut them a check.
Okay. We spoke, I guess, over a year ago when I was doing a piece for this. That's where we first hooked up. And I think you said at the time you were a fan of something called...
When you called me, I thought you were like tech support.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't know, why is this guy calling?
It happens. But you were a fan of something called the negative income tax. You're still a fan? And maybe what exactly is that?
Well, negative income tax is probably the version of the basic income that you'll find sort of conservatives and more market folks, they probably like the best, because it isn't just you get a check for existing. It's like go out and get a job, and then we'll determine sort of as a society what is a decent standard of living, and if that job only pays X and we think it should be something else, we will top that off until we can raise you up to what we think is sort of like the basic standard of living you should have as a human. So it involves work. We actually have something kind of like that. It's called the Earned Income Tax Credit. It's kind of a pro-work subsidy. So I think building first on that and then seeing how technology plays out. I think we still think jobs are a good thing. It's people, they get value from it. It's how they order their lives. And in fact, there's been all this concern about sort of the white working class. What do we do about them? Well, why don't we just give them more checks? Yet when people conduct interviews, or my gosh, people have actually talked to them, what you find out is that they would prefer jobs. Because again, it's sort of just how you think about yourself and you self-identify. So to the extent that we can keep people working, and even if we would have to raise their incomes externally in some way, I think that would be the best way. And that's kind of what negative income tax. It's an old Milton Friedman idea, by the way.
Facebook, I see you have a question.
In what year would you project that automation would affect the American job landscape to the point where we would need to talk about universal basic income or one of these other alternatives?
Well, right, great question. I mean, let's just take kind of like the driverless cars, which are millions of workers. Again, estimates depending which car company you're talking to.
I know Uber, Google, and a few other, and Ford are all saying that by 2020 or 2021 is when they're
so
going to
on
release
the
them.
road, you might actually have fairly rapid adoption, as the fleet turns over. So if you figure 2025, 2030, a very high percentage will be automated. I think that's. Maybe that is a conversation about basic income that will be maybe like the top political issue for those elections. So I think I'm sort of taking a middle range. I think it may take a bit longer than what the technologists think, but maybe a bit faster than what a lot of the economists think. Since I think that it's very easy to sort of just look at the past and think these predictions haven't panned out. But I think it's something we need to prepare for now. Whether it's thinking a lot more about education. And how that safety net should be changed, because a lot of those things are good ideas anyway. So let's do them.
Well, one other solution which I thought was interesting and actually I kind of like for personal reasons is the CEO of Alphabet, Larry Page. He's voiced support for, and a lot of people are, for the 4-day work week. Now, for those of you that might sound weird, but we used to have a standard 6-day work week in America. Then the unions came along and it became the 5-day work week. So I don't know, what kind of effect would if we all decided to do the 4-day work week instead?
Right. I mean, the work week has shrunk. So to think that it might continue to shrink I mean, I think that's not a crazy notion. Again, I wouldn't want to suddenly say like tomorrow, let's go to a 4-day work week. Because again, I don't think this is like a crisis. I'm a big believer in solutions that are like gradual. You know, they're tried out hopefully on a small scale, and not to sort of leapfrog into, you know, the future where, you know, we need to do this sort of thing. But I think the point is to make sure that whatever this looks like, to make sure people have jobs, or at least sort of meaningful work, whether or not it is a job with a paycheck, or it is some other kind of work that you're certainly compensated for. I think that's the key. And I think to make those kind of programs politically sustainable, people have to think that someone's adding some sort of value to society to get a check. Now, there are people, particularly, I guess, on the far left, who think, listen, it's a human right. You know, you should not have to work. And government should, you know, in that case, you know, give you an income. I think in reality that's going to be a very tough sell.
Let's talk, when you talk about education and kind of moving people towards the future, I don't know, what's your view about like STEM sort of education? Everyone's big on STEM, saying we have to get the kids science, technology, engineering, all that stuff. But people I've talked to have also mentioned that, you know, one of the good things that kids should learn is the soft skills, because a robot will probably never be able to, you know, make another person smile, at least not in the near future, or like that sort of thing. So you're going to need the front-facing people to have those sort of like skills, even though, you know, people in the back might be all done by robots. So I don't know, is there a balance there, or what do you think is the most important thing for us to be teaching kids at this point?
Listen, like every parent in America is wondering that if their kid goes to college, that they're going to like make them become like a computer science major. Maybe I'm doing that. We'll just leave that out there. But I think there's going to be room for all kinds of jobs. When I was you know, kind of a full-time journalist rather than working at a think tank, one time I visited the great design firm out in Palo Alto, IDEO, which was a fascinating company. And what I remember is that they had all kinds of people working there. They certainly had computer engineers, software engineers, developers, but what I remember is that they also had anthropologists working there, and they had people who just were, had English majors, people who tell good stories, because people are still going to want stories, they're going to want narratives. So I think there's still going to be a place for all kinds of jobs. You just better be very good at them.
Okay, fair enough. Now you mentioned, let's see, Facebook, you have a question.
What's the type of job that you don't think robots would take over that would like remain always?
What are the safe jobs? Yeah.
I think
Facebook Live host.
Facebook Live. Journalist at a technology-oriented magazine. Someone working at a think tank. I think there are going to be creative jobs. Again, it's a little bit of a pat answer, but sort of, creative, abstract thinking jobs, plus sort of, your kind of interaction. I think there's always going to be a place for those, and I think those can be extremely, those can be valuable. But there are a lot that we talk about automation, like we're going to automate the job, but maybe it's just parts of the job. I mean, that's sort of like the optimistic version, is that kind of the boring, rote parts of our jobs, those we automate, and sort of the more interesting, creative parts, we can focus more time on those. Because there are chunks of our jobs which could already be automated today with current technology. You don't need anything beyond what we have. So again, I think in school, like I want to make sure that kids are also being taught creative schools. So we may have to rethink the curriculum somewhat. And I mean, and there are certainly a lot of countries, a lot of times Asian countries are sort of jealous of the American school system, because even though we may not score as well in these tests, they feel like we are kind of learning some of these more creative, adaptive skills that their kids aren't. So I mean, we do some things well in the United States.
So just to bring it over the conversation to the economy in general, you cover the economy for a long time. Is the entire economy, particularly the stock market, completely fake and made up fantasy world? I have more to that question if you want it, or maybe that's enough for you.
Is there more? If there's more, I would love that.
Okay, well, it's like there's two. Okay, I'll give you two examples of things that just don't make sense, and I'm wondering if we're actually Westworld robots. Okay, so oil prices. When they go low, that seems to hurt the stock market. Now, I understand it's a gauge of how much demand there is, but if prices go down on oil, then businesses should be able to save money, and consumers will have more money to buy goods and services, which should be good for the stock market. So that's weird. Okay, and then here's the other thing which I found super curious. First quarter of 2016, last year, Apple announced that it had made $18.4 billion in profits. Now, this was the most money any company in the history of ever had made up to that point. But then because iPhone sales had kind of leveled off somewhat within those numbers, the stock took a huge hit. So yeah, is the economy completely made up in fantasy world?
Let me take that 12-part question.
Sure.
We're going to
Yes,
take
yes.
parts 11 and 12
Okay,
first.
Yeah.
One thing, and I started out my career covering the stock market. I started covering the NASDAQ, which is kind of infuriating for me because if I started covering the NASDAQ, Apple was like not even a player. It was a very cheap stock. Marvel Comics was also a very cheap stock, and I sometimes will run numbers that had I invested in Apple and Marvel back then, and I do a lot of weeping. But so one thing I know, markets, they don't like abrupt changes.
Yeah.
So when you have like huge swings in oil prices, that can be problematic. It's also going to be problematic for oil companies.
Yeah.
When you had the big drop in oil prices, that was bad for a lot of these fracking companies. That means they were laying people off. They weren't investing as much. So that was a concern. I mean, and those have stocks.
Yeah. But it's good for everybody else.
Right. It's good for everybody
Yeah, yeah.
else. Not though that still can affect like the market average.
Yeah.
So. There might be net winners, but there's going to be some losers too.
Yeah.
And especially, again, the volatility. I know that markets don't like volatility. And then for like Apple, it's always what was the estimate? What was the whisper estimate? And so if you're trying to forecast future earnings, you're trying to look at those bits of the earnings report, which have been huge revenue drivers in the past. Even though the report itself may beat the estimate, if the forecast for the future, because the markets are forward-looking, discounting future news. The stock can still go down. So it's always an expectations game. Merely beating estimates or even kind of the whisper estimate they think that may not be enough if there's other things in that report which show that growth may be decelerating in the future. No, I don't think it's a fake economy.
Okay.
And I'm not. Listen, I think the American economy has amazing strengths. I think we have these great universities. We have Silicon Valley. Nobody creates sort of fast-growing, innovative companies, like the United States. I think if you still want to do great things in the world, this is still like the best place to try to do them. So I think but we also have real challenges. You could talk about growth has been pretty slow. Even productivity growth has been slow. Labor force participation, inequality. We'd like mobility to be better. So I think there are some really good things. But I do not think the economy is a mess like the president says.
Okay, fair enough. Facebook, you have a question.
Once we gave robots their jobs, what would humans' day-to-day life look like?
Name a movie.
Listen. Well, it really depends. One, I mean, obviously the pat answer is we're going to play video games all day, lose yourself in virtual reality. Work for the robots. We can supply their power. They will be their batteries. But I think that's a real concern. People want meaningful lives and doing meaningful things. And while getting a high score on a video game may be fantastic, I think people want to do some. And listen, we have a big world with lots of problems and people who need help. So I think you don't have to look very hard to see, even in the future, that where you can help your fellow man, if not here, elsewhere.
Let's just talk also about the general question about the kind of this global populist moment that we're experiencing. I think, especially when Trump was making negative, telling how terrible things are, you went on tweet storms about actually no, things are pretty good. I think you're an optimist like me, but there's this weird global populist thing happening. Now, if you look at the big numbers throughout the last century and stuff. Everyone alive today is the most fortunate people to ever exist. I mean, crime rates, war rates are way down. There was just a stat that came out about childhood mortality has been, a fraction of what it once was. All the numbers just around the globe are going in the right way. We're really privileged to all be here for it. So where did this, why does everyone want to throw the table up that everything is so good? Right. It's weird.
Right. I was it's kind of a thought experiment. I think, how much would someone have to pay me to go live in, not like medieval times, but 1985?
Yeah.
Last week.
Yeah.
Sometimes, I really like sort of the now.
Yeah.
But you have this pessimism. I think part of it, listen, I think some people have not done particularly well over the last, decade or more. So that you can explain that. But even people who sort of have done well, I think there is a lot of concern about the future, not just automation, but what kind of job your kids will get. They're going to go to college, have huge loans, and what what kind of job will they have. Plus, I mean, there's a lot of partisanship, and so the classic number people look at is like the direction of the country.
Yeah.
The country, like 70% of people thought the country is going in the wrong direction. But there was a huge breakdown where Democrats thought it kind of wasn't going in the wrong direction, and Republicans did. And those numbers have sort of shifted since the election.
How's that happen?
I know. So I think there's a lot of partisanship, but I think there is a real kind of gnawing concern that maybe things are happening fast. We don't know quite what those jobs are going to look like. We sort of never do know what the new jobs are going to look like. And we can kind of see that future sort of develop. And I think there's a lot of anxiety about that.
Facebook, you have a question.
What random fact did Alex Trebek ask you about during the Meet the Contestants part of Jeopardy?
Speaking of anxiety, I had a tremendous amount of anxiety that he was going to ask me the names of my children.
Yeah.
And I would not remember any of their names. And he did ask me about my children, and thankfully I did.
But not specifics.
No, not specifics. That was a big hurdle to get over. So I think that was the one kind of trivia question.
Yeah.
I was on two shows. Won my first one, lost my second one. Which I blame on eating lunch in the middle. I think I kind of got bogged down with too many carbs. That's the excuse.
Okay.
But it was a great experience.
Cool. So you work at the kind of nexus of politics and media, and both of which are targets for hackers, foreign and domestic. I don't know, are your colleagues at the AEI and maybe other people you just see around in DC when you're going to brunch or whatever, are they all taking digital security a lot more seriously? Do you see people using the Signal app and are using encrypted messaging and things like that?
I think for some people since the election they've been taking digital security a lot more. I still think Washington is catching up on this, and I think especially more recently with these sort of hacking attacks on the Democratic Party, that people are certainly not now. It just doesn't seem kind of again something that happens in Silicon Valley, and we really don't need to focus on it. So I know that we, as sort of an institution, are devoting a lot more resources, sort of understanding the public policy issues. I would expect that. To continue.
A general question: is greed good?
Is greed good?
Yeah.
I think people trying. I think opportunity is good. Okay. I think people trying to create lives of flourishing and being ambitious is good. I think very few people are in it just for the money. Maybe that's you. I don't know. But I think they want to achieve something, and then when they look back in their lives, say I did this, and I made somebody's life better. I still think that's most people. Okay. Even if those are I help my family and I help my kids have more opportunities. So I think that's what most people try and do. But I'm sure there are some who it's just the dollar.
And I did have a Jeopardy question. Do you remember on your winning day what your final Jeopardy question was?
Oh yeah.
Can me and Pete try to answer it?
Yeah.
All right, what's the topic?
Okay. And I'll say that in sort of the green room before Jeopardy, people were saying it was unfair when doctors got medical questions, or lawyers got legal questions. So as a journalist, I was lucky enough to get a quasi journalism question.
Okay.
All right. So they, I don't remember the exact year now, but sometime in the 90s, they redid the White House press office.
Okay.
And when they rehabbed the press office, they named it after somebody. Who did they name it after?
Who is James Brady? Is that his name? Pete?
Any other answers from the ether?
Jimmy Carter.
Great. He's ready. Bingo. James Brady.
I won Jeopardy.
Yeah, you won. I was the only one who got that right.
Wow, really?
That's right. I beat a 5-time champ. With that one.
Wow.
So it took me a moment. It took me a moment longer than what it took you.
Yeah.
You got it much faster than me. Then when it came to me, I just kind of scrawled Brady in big capital letters, and there we go.
Very good. So I'm heartened to know that I would do well in Jeopardy in
very well.
1992-ish. What were you talking about?
Oh, this was 2002.
2002. Oh, perfect. Even better. Okay, now we always do a lightning round of the same questions we ask all our guests. Very simple, very simple. Okay, Windows or Mac?
Windows.
Windows, Android, or iOS?
iOS.
Okay. Have you recently come across a piece of technology that made you think, wow, I'm really living in the future?
Oculus Rift.
Okay. Where do you get your daily news from and information? Twitter, Facebook?
The first thing I do is go to, I have two Twitter lists I check all the time, which is an economics-based one and one which is tech venture capital. The first thing I do is check those before I check, the newspapers, news sites, Financial Times, and so forth.
I will give you a free plug that if you should follow this man on Twitter, at Jim Pethokoukis. He tweets a lot. But he's also, regardless of where you are on the political spectrum, he has a lot of valuable things to say. So check that out. Ed Snowden, traitor or hero?
Traitor.
Okay, interesting. Let's talk about that. You're the first person I think that has actually said traitor.
I do know that there were people killed because murdered because of his revelation. So yeah, I would still call that traitor.
Okay. And we are to dig it down to a happier place. Maybe we should read one of these questions.
Great. Great. And strong.
We're in the golden age of television. What are you watching these days?
What do I watch these days? Obviously, I'm still waiting for the next season of Game of Thrones. I'm only now catching up to House of Cards.
That's really depressing now.
So, but what am I watching new? I just started watching Legion, which just premiered because I'm a big comic book guy, and it's kind of an X-Men universe. So,
Oh, very cool. Okay, so anything else? Gave you follow him on Twitter, but anything else you want to plug? You have the podcast.
I do have a podcast, which is on it's on Ricochet, which is kind of this center-right community, but we also repost it here at the AEI website with a nice transcript. But follow me on Twitter. That's key.
Yeah, that is key. Okay, I think that's all we have today. So for those of you watching at home, give us a like, give us a share. We always appreciate those. Check out some of our past interviews. We have a lot of those. And now also with the Convo is now on podcast, and it's available on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast at. And if you like it, give us a subscribe, give us a like, give us a review. We appreciate those. Thanks to everyone at home who participated. Thanks to Social Pete. And as always, be good to each other. Peace. Want to give the peace symbol?
Yes.